There's a moment of intense emotion when a human being loses a loved one who's close to them, and that comes out so powerfully in this week's Parsha, where we read about the most heartbreaking event and incident that imaginable, and that is Aaron the high priest. It's this incredible occasion of the inauguration and the beginning of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, and it begins with the death of his two sons, Nadav and Avihu. There's this moment where the two of them die on the day as the inauguration is beginning, and he's bereft. Can you imagine losing, God forbid, two sons on one day? And what is his reaction in the Chumash? It's described as, says like this: Vayidom Aharon, he was silent. Vayidom Aharon, he was silent. There was so much devastation. The Ramban actually says that he was crying and then he was silent. But actually, just reading the text straight, there was his reaction to everything that happened was silence, which was this devastating silence. He had no words. There was no way that he could express his grief and his loss. It was just total silence. And there's an amazing Ba'al HaTurim, one of the commentators on the Chumash, that compares it, this word Vayidom, to the same Hebrew word used in the book of Joshua in chapter 10. There was the famous miracle. He was doing battle with one of the kings of Israel as part of the conquest, and he was winning the battle, and he called on Hashem to do a miracle to hold the sun in its place so that he could continue the battle and wouldn't be nightfall, and then the enemy would escape. And a great miracle was done where the sun stood still in its place, and it uses exactly the same Hebrew word, Vayidom Hashemesh, the sun stood still. So to Aaron here, there's the silence, but it's actually like standing still. He like stood still. We have the sense of, and the fact that it uses the same Hebrew word and the Ba'al HaTurim links the two, it's almost as if for Aaron losing his two sons on that occasion, the whole world stood still. Vayidom. That's almost as if time stood still. He was in such a state of devastation. Everything was in suspension. Reality suspended itself. And he had no words to express it. And this, of course, is Aaron the high priest, who was such an incredible spiritual leader, the leader of the Jewish people, the Kohen Gadol, the head of the temple, and he had no words to express it. And it's important for us to know this, because human beings, when we experience grief, when we experience intense emotion, often words cannot be adequate. And there's an amazing passage in the Gemara in Brachot where it actually says, the reward for a house of mourning is for silence. The reward that a person gets in a house of mourning is for silence, as opposed to, it says, the reward at a wedding is to speak. The Gemara actually says that it is speeches at a wedding that bring joy to the chosen and kala, but in a house of mourning, it's silence. So actually the appropriate halachic response when you go to a shiva house is not to say anything. You have to wait. It's hard to do that because instinctively you want to say something. You want to fill the silence, the awkwardness with words and start talking to them. But it says you must leave the mourner to speak if the mourner wants to speak. And if the mourner wants to just sit there in silence, you sit there in silence. Your job as one who comes to comfort is actually silence. Because what can words say? Person has lost their loved one. And how can words fill that vacuum, and how can words heal the heart? You're just there to say, I'm with you at this time, and you actually leave the silence in place. And silence is actually very powerful. We think we have to speak and we have to say. To be a human being is to share words. In fact, our sages describe the essence of the human being as the medaber, the speaker. So we want to speak. But sometimes the emotions are so intense that words can do no justice to what is being said and to what is being experienced at that time. Because part of what one wants to do, and there's this human need, is to explain, how did this tragedy happen? What happened here? How could it be? And looking for ways of comfort and looking for meaning and looking for a higher purpose. But we can't do that because as human beings we are limited. Even Aaron the high priest, even at this moment, what happened there at the opening of the inauguration with the death of his two sons, of Nadav and Avihu, was an act of God. The Torah describes it. But even with that, and even with the explanations that were given, those words couldn't hold him at that time. There was just too much pain, and it's not the time to philosophize. That's the whole book of Job, of Eov, is where he's experienced unspeakable loss and grief and tragedy. Then his friends come and they start explaining things, and this is why it's happened, and this was Hashem's plan. That's not the role. That's not the role for comforters. You just come and you sit in silence. And so too, even with Aaron the high priest, there was that tremendous need for Vayidom Aharon. There's nothing to say. Words can't do anything. Words are too inadequate, and in fact, they become hurtful. And this leads us to an amazing Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, because as you know, as part of this series on the Parsha, we always try to build this around a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. And there's an amazing Mishnah in Pirkei Avot where the Mishnah says like this: Al teratzei et chavercha b'shat kaso. Don't come and appease and calm your friend at the moment that they've lost their temper, that they're angry. Va'al tenachamenu. Do not comfort them b'sha'ah shemeita muta lefanav, at the moment that their dead lies before them. And the commentators explain this is actually like exactly was in the case of the Parsha, where the person has died and they haven't yet been buried, and even the Shiva hasn't begun, but it's at the most raw and painful part of it. You don't bring comfort at that point. Va'al tishal lo b'shat nidro. If a person takes a vow and you want to try and help them out of the vow, where you ask them questions to say, where a person would made a vow in anger, and to say they take a vow not to speak to another person, or to say, I will get no benefit from you, I don't want to have anything further to do with you. The way to get out of that halachically is if you say, did you consider this, did you consider that? But you don't start those kind of questions when they're in the heat of the moment and they made the vow. You don't start asking any questions. And don't try and see a person in their moment of disgrace, where they have stumbled, they've done something that they're ashamed of. Don't come and be there at that time. Let the intensity of these emotions pass first, then you can bring the comfort. Then you can bring the pacifying. Then you can try and help the person out of their predicament. Then you can offer them the support and the strength that they need. And what's so fascinating here is the comment here of the Sforno, and his comment on this Mishnah. He says, Afal pi shira'ui letzadik lihishtadel betikun chaveiro. A tzaddik wants to help. What is the nature of a righteous person? You want to try and help someone fix the problem that they're dealing with. Like he says, like the verse says, V'havta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. You want to do this incredible mitzvah of chesed. So you can see the person is in a state of loss and grief. You can see the person is in a state of anger or disgrace, or a person is in a state of resentment, and you want to try and help them through it. But sometimes what a person needs is not for us to do, but actually to do nothing. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to hold back, and hold back on the instinct, because instinctively you see a person in need, you really want to help them. So you try and reach out and you try and do something for them, but that's the worst time to do it, because their anger is at its maximum. Their sense of grief is at its worst. The sense of resentment, the sense of fear, the bewilderment. You need those intense emotions to calm down, because the Sforno explains, he says, when a person's emotions are so intense, they can't receive the comfort. And then when you try to comfort them when the grief is too raw, that actually becomes insensitive. It adds to the pain. When you tell a person who's losing their temper and they are so angry, and you tell them to calm down, that's actually the worst. A person who's very angry and you tell them to calm down actually makes them more angry. When a person is ashamed or disgraced by something that they have done, to be with them at that time, actually, so what happens is, says the Sforno, the intentions are positive. You want to help. You want to fulfill the verse, love your neighbor as yourself. You want to do the chesed, the kindness. But by acting, you actually are exacerbating the person's pain. And so what is required then is, and this becomes an absolutely critical thing. The first step in trying to help and to do chesed and to do kindness is empathy. First thing we have to do is put ourselves into the shoes of the person, into the place. What are they feeling at this moment? Do they need me to step forward and help? Or do they need me to hold back and give them their space and their dignity and then come in afterwards? That requires, and that's brought as an expression later on in Pirkei Avot, where it says that a person needs to strive for the level which is called nosei ba'ol im chaveiro, to carry the burden of another person. But in order to do that means you have to feel their pain, or feel their joy, or feel where they are. Empathy is to say an act of kindness begins not about treating that person as a mitzvah object. Now here is a person that I can do a mitzvah with. Need to think, what is that person going through? Am I helping or am I making it harder for them? Can I do something to alleviate it? But in order to do that, I have to really imagine what it's like to be them. And that requires real sympathy, real empathy, and a real sense of thinking carefully that kindness is not only about doing, but it is thinking about the impact of what one does. And here's where it gets really interesting. The mitzvah of kindness of chesed, the source for it is unlike all of the other 613 mitzvahs. All of the other 613 mitzvahs are structured as a direct instruction. Hashem says, put on tefillin, daven, take a lulav, eat matzah, tell the story of the going out of Egypt, keep Shabbos. These are very specific instructions that come from God, and they tell you what to do, and then the halacha tells you how to do it, and it's very, very clear. The only mitzvah that is not like that is the mitzvah of chesed, of kindness. There the mitzvah is not structured, you shall be kind, do this for, help another person. It's structured in this way, v'halachta bidrachav, walk in the ways of Hashem. Emulate God. And the Gemara says, Mahu rachum afata rachum. In the same way He's compassionate, you should be compassionate. In the same way He looks after He buried the dead. When He buried Moses, so too should you. Clothe the naked, feed the hungry, help. It becomes a mitzvah of doing what God does. So this halachic structure of the mitzvah, it's not you shall be kind. The halachic structure of the mitzvah is do what Hashem does. And Hashem acts with kindness. Now you act like God. Now, what does that teach us? It teaches us, number one, that chesed, kindness, is godly. Means it's literally doing the work of God to be a kind person. But it's telling us something even more profound. And that is that to be truly kind and to help people and to support people requires godly wisdom, insight, and creativity. Because God, Hashem, knows what people are feeling. Hashem knows what people need. So it's saying in order to be a truly kind person, you have to summons and dig deep and access Hashem's wisdom and insight. Of course, as human beings, we can't access all of it, but we can strive for it, which is to think creatively, with flexibility, with insight, with creativity. You see, because kindness is not about an action that you do. When you put on tefillin, there's a job to be done. When you daven, there's a job to be done. When you eat a piece of matzah, there is a job to be done. When you keep Shabbos, it's got all the parameters of what you do. Even when you give tzedakah, there's money which has to be allocated. But tzedakah is very similar to chesed, to kindness. It's not something that can just be done in a mechanical way with a simple set of objectives and instructions that you achieve a particular goal. It is much more nuanced than that and much more broad. Kindness can't be contained in one act. It's the thinking, it's the feeling, it's the empathy, it's the sensitivity, it's the creativity, it's the thinking around, is this a person who needs a meal, or is this a person who needs money? Is this a person who needs love and a hug? Is this a person who needs space? Is this a person who needs company? Is this a person who needs time alone? All of those things, there isn't a specific instruction. It is a broad thing. Think like Hashem. And Hashem thinks with sensitivity, with empathy, with creativity. And then we fill the needs not based on what we want to do, not based on that we instinctively want to fill the empty space with words. We think, what does the person need? And in that way that we act like God. But there's an amazing thing here, that God serves as a role model, not only for the act of kindness, but for helping us understand what vulnerability is. And there's something mind-blowing on this Mishnah that we've just been through, this Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, where the Rivash and the Rav, they quote from a Midrash. The Vilna Gaon also quotes from the same Midrash that says that our role model in Hashem is not only in what we do, but in vulnerability. Meaning, Hashem feigns vulnerability in order to teach us about the vulnerability of others. Meaning the following: the examples that the Midrash gives to explain our Mishnah are examples from Hashem himself. So it says here, do not appease your friend at the time of anger. We learn that from Hashem. Because Hashem says, at the moment after the sin of the golden calf, Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, don't talk to me now about forgiving the people. Come back to me just now. Not that Hashem loses his temper. He's above that. But he is acting like a human being to teach us that sometimes human beings need their space. When it says, do not comfort the mourner when he's dead lie before him, there's an amazing example the Midrash brings. It says that at the time of the destruction of the temple, the first temple, the angels came to Hashem to comfort him because he was in mourning for the loss of the temple and for the exile of the Jewish people and the suffering of his children. And Hashem said, don't comfort me now. I can't be comforted. There's too much pain. The Midrash says, don't come to me now. I can't be comforted. And it says, do not ask him at the time of the vow. When Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, you will not enter our vow, you will not enter the land of Israel. Moses does not speak to God then. He waits years later to make that entreaty, Va'et Hanan, to pray that he should be let into the land of Israel. And then finally, when it says, do not see a person at their time of their disgrace, then before Hashem confronts Adam and Eve after their first sin, to confront them and say, why did you sin? He makes them clothes first because they felt embarrassed. They'd eaten from the forbidden fruits, the tree of knowledge. They became self-aware. They became aware of their nakedness. He makes them clothes as an act of kindness first. Then he confronts them about their sin because they weren't ready for it and he didn't want to shame them. So we learn from God the vulnerability of the human condition, not that he has anger or that he feels bereft like a human being does, but he feigns this so that we understand that we can learn from him, and he becomes our role model, not only in the chesed, but in the vulnerability, which is a mind-blowing thought. And that brings us to the conclusion of our discussion. There's an amazing consequence of what this is teaching us. And that is based on a verse in the book of Isaiah where God says, Imo anochi betzara. The book of Tehillim, I am with you in your tzoros, in your pain. Imo anochi betzara. Can you imagine this? Think about this Midrash. Hashem, the angels want to comfort Hashem for the destruction of his temple and the exile of his children, of the Jewish people, and the pain of the exile and the suffering. And Hashem says, don't comfort me. But what do you mean, don't comfort me? Who allowed the temple to be destroyed and who sent the people into exile? It was Hashem. So what does all of this mean? What it means is this. It relates to a passage in the Gemara where a Roman general comes to Rabbi Akiva and he said, how do you give charity to the poor? If God wanted those people to be wealthy, he would have given them money. Now you giving them money, are you not working against the will of Hashem? And Rabbi Akiva said, but this is the will of Hashem, that we help him and work with him to alleviate poverty. And the Gemara says on the pasuk, V'rapo yerapeh, you shall surely heal. So the Gemara says, it's a verse where it talks about damages, where two people were fighting and someone got injured. The Gemara says, from here is permission was given to a doctor to heal. because a doctor should not have permission to heal, because ultimately, if God wanted the person to be well, they would be well. Now you go to a doctor. You're not undoing the will of God. So it says, no, permission was given for the doctor to heal. So what does all of this mean? It means the concept of what our sages say. We become a shutaf lakadosh baruch hu b'maaseh bereshit. We are a partner with God in creation. And through the mitzvah of chesed, that is how we express our partnership. Meaning, this world is full of challenge, it's full of pain, it's full of suffering, it's full of the travails of the human condition. And God has created as such, because this is a world where human beings must grow and develop and do mitzvahs, and He calls on us to be His partners to alleviate the suffering. And then all of that is rewarded in the next world, the world of perfection, the world of comfort, the world where there is no suffering and there is no human condition. It's just the world of the souls and of beauty and of pleasure and of tranquility. But this is the world of struggle, of pain, of challenge, but then of the mitzvah of making a difference. And so what you see from this Mishnah is that God's with us in this world as our partners. He feels our pain and then says, help me to make this world into a better place. Heal people, give tzedakah, give charity, build this world together with me, Hashem says to each and every single one of us. And therefore, He becomes our role model for chesed, for kindness, and He becomes our role model for the vulnerability and the pain of the human condition. And He says that we must join Him in alleviating that pain and making this world into a better place.